So look, now that the dust has settled on the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Samoa, I'm keen to just perhaps start with a general assessment from yourself in terms of how you think CHOGM went.
I think from a logistics, from an event point of view, looking at it from afar, it certainly seemed like it had gone off really well. We know that it was a bit of an all hands on deck to get everything ready. There had been issues around accommodation and would there be enough food, but it certainly seemed that in terms of all of that, it went very smoothly, as we would kind of expect. The people of Samoa came together to deliver a really top-notch experience for their visitors. So I think that's something to be welcomed and to be celebrated. It's the first time that this event has been held in a small island state in the Pacific, so it's great that we've been able to demonstrate to the global community that we can put together events of this quality and that they go well. In terms of what it means for the Commonwealth going forward, and in particular what it means for the Pacific membership of the Commonwealth, I think that's still up for debate. I think the Commonwealth itself is in something of a state of flux and in something of a transition mode. So we've got King Charles coming in as head of the Commonwealth, replacing his mother, for whom the Commonwealth, we know, held a lot of importance for her. So he's now taking on that role. There'll be a new Secretary General, this time chosen from within the African states, and that's likely to have some impact. We know that she and other members of the states are very keen to progress this work around reparative justice in relation to the impacts of particularly the slave trade among Commonwealth members. So I think there is a state of flux. The role of the UK as a global power, possibly a waning global power that's seeking to re-establish itself and sees the Commonwealth as a vehicle for that, I think will also come into play. So I think there's a lot to, if you think the Commonwealth is worth watching, then I think there's a lot to watch.
Certainly. And look, let's tap into it a wee bit further. In terms of obviously the biggest existential crisis facing the Pacific and indeed the world is climate change. And, it's obviously been made mention in the leader statement and the Samoa communique. Let's go there, though, in terms of, was there anything tangible that was perhaps achieved at this meeting from a climate perspective, in your opinion?
I think obviously 56 states came together to issue this statement, and they've stated their position on climate change. The fact that it comes before COP is possibly interesting. It gives a chance for these states to caucus around what they want to take to COP. But I think we did see some noticeable exceptions, and possibly the biggest one is a lack of a commitment to move away from fossil fuel extraction. And you've got to remember that within this membership, yes, you have Samoa and Vanuatu and other small island states who are very much on the front line of this crisis, but you've also got countries like Australia, India, Canada, for whom, who are much more fossil fuels focused and would possibly find it difficult to sign up to something that said, we're going to do away with fossil fuels altogether. So I think that illustrates what we know about other multilateral forums that, in order to get something that everyone can sign up to, it can lead to it looking a little bit weak or flimsy in some areas.
Certainly. And look, if we go there in terms of, I'm keen to hear your thoughts on this. Perhaps I'm being facetious here, but taking a look at international coverage when it comes to CHOGM, I mean, ultimately, if we take a look at the UK, ITV News, BBC, most of their coverage was around why the UK wouldn't discuss slavery and also the Lydia Thorpe situation in Australia. And it kind of overshadowed things. What's your thoughts on that, though?
I think you're right that those issues did draw a lot of media energy. Senator Thorpe's protests in Australia were designed to get as much attention as possible. She was obviously very successful in that. In the UK, given the demographics of the UK and with the legacy of slavery and the significant population from African and Caribbean countries, surprising that that's a big issue for them. Those are the parts of the Commonwealth where this is a much bigger issue than maybe is the case in the Pacific. However, from the Pacific's point of view, it's important to realise that text does make specific reference to blackbirding. And that is a significant issue for Australia and particularly the countries that were victims of blackbirding: Vanuatu, New Caledonia, not a member of the Commonwealth, Solomon Islands. So I think it is, whilst it's maybe not been a big topic of conversation, as this work goes forward, it'll be interesting to see how this conversation grows, if at all, among Pacific communities.
Certainly. And look, I don't want to be critical in terms of the previous, Patricia Scotland. If we go there, if you take a look at her time in the role, was she effective?
There have been numerous questions about Patricia Cornwall's leadership of the Commonwealth, and certainly some significant concerns expressed by some of the bigger countries, including Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. Some of her time as Secretary General coincided with the COVID period. So I think, we all kind of get a bit of a, not a free pass, but certainly I don't know that any of us were as effective as we would have liked to have been during that time. And I'm sure that affected her as well. She's certainly, since COVID, she's certainly been a bit more active. She's been very connected into Samoa in terms of preparations for this event. But I think overall, as I said, this is a transition period, and part of that transition is a new Secretary General, and I think there will be a hope that she can refresh some of the processes and practices of the Commonwealth. One thing that I do think is interesting, and we should make note of, is that this is now 2 women in a row. So the Commonwealth's appointed another woman as Secretary General. When you look at the countries who are members of the Commonwealth, there are a significant number of countries there, including those from the Pacific, where women in leadership is still very much a work in progress. So I think, in terms of a symbolic, kind of like something to look to, that it is significant that the Commonwealth has appointed another woman as Secretary General.
Yes, and it's well worth mentioning and pointing out. Thank you for that. Look, I also want to go there with the Commonwealth Ocean Declaration for One Resilient Common Future. Quite a title in itself, but what do you make of it?
Look, I think a lot of that will resonate with Pacific Island states. It's not the first Oceans Declaration. I think it's interesting and possibly a bit surprising that it's taken the Commonwealth so long to come up with one, given that 49 of the member states have ocean boundaries. So, you would have thought it would have been maybe on their radar before now. I think there will be a lot of resonance with Pacific states. I think a significant absence from that declaration is that there is absolutely no mention of deep sea mining. Now, we know that this is a really key issue for a number of Pacific states. We know it's a fault line among the members of the Pacific Islands Forum. Again, I wasn't in the room. I don't know how that text was arrived at, but I would imagine that Canada would have been quite wary of going too far down the deep sea mining road. The Metals Company, which is a very active private sector organization in this space, is a Canadian company. So, I think we can expect that to have played into it. But I think certainly for a number of activists and a number of Pacific leaders, including those of Vanuatu, that will be a bit of a disappointment that it doesn't get a mention.
Yeah, that's right. And also, inevitably, when these meetings are held, questions always surface around, for example, Australia becoming a fully fledged republic, New Zealand seeking to become a republic. Inevitably, those questions are raised. Do you think sentiment is perhaps changing where those countries like New Zealand and Australia want to explore that?
Well, I am very much an outsider when it comes to Australia and New Zealand, so I don't know that I'm qualified to judge. I do live in Australia. I think generally there was a sense that if that conversation were to change, it wouldn't happen until after the death of Queen Elizabeth II. So that obviously that has now come to pass. Certainly in terms of what we saw in Australia, the premiers of Australia didn't meet with the king. They kind of said, well, we've got other things to do. So I think that sense of the royalty as a draw card is possibly waning. I think it's important in terms of the Commonwealth to remember that you can still be a member of the Commonwealth if you're a republic. So Vanuatu is a republic, but is a member of the Commonwealth. So you don't have to have the king as your head of state. You can have the best of both worlds, if you like.
Yes, certainly. And let's pick up on another point, and I think it's particularly important to me, but perhaps those the general public may not care so much, in terms of the revised Commonwealth principles on freedom of expression and the role of the media. Again, your assessment of that?
So there was very little attention given to this. It was kind of tucked away. It was a revised statement of principles. They've obviously done quite a bit of work around recognizing that the media landscape has changed. So there's references to bloggers, use of social media, those things that weren't there previously. So it's very much an update. But I think in terms of, you know, I've been asked by people at the Commonwealth Secretariat, what is it that we can bring that kind of is different? And I said, and I feel that given where we are in the Pacific and elsewhere in the world, the importance of democratic resilience cannot be overstated. And so if the Commonwealth can bring some weight to bear around issues of freedom of the media, independence of the media, freedom of information and freedom of expression, then I think that is beneficial. It is quite aspirational when you look at, again, when you look at the countries that make up the membership of the Commonwealth, there are some significant issues to be addressed there, including continuing use of the death penalty, continuing criminalization of homosexuality, issues relating to media freedom. They play out. So I think it's important that the Commonwealth has kind of planted this flag. There's no enforcement mechanism attached to this, William. There's no sanctions or whatever else. It is an aspiration, but it is part of, if we are going to see other countries want to be members, it is something that the Commonwealth can point to and say, these are things that we take seriously and we want you to commit to working as hard as you can in that sphere. In terms of actual impact, I think it's hard to say, but it's something that we, you as a media professional, me as a commentator in the media, our colleagues in the Pacific can point to and say, well, you know, we are members of the Commonwealth, and this is what the Commonwealth says about that.
And look, that goes to my next question. I mean, ultimately, some may perhaps look at CHOGM and think, boy, this is nothing more than virtue signaling or ticking a box in terms of just meeting and chatting. What do you say to that kind of sentiment that's out there?
Well, I think, I think there is, there's an element of truth to that. It's a significant global bloc. It comprises 56 members, and it has I think it's particularly significant in the kind of the center of gravity is very much in the global south in terms of its membership. And that's because it is a product of colonialism and post-colonialism. I think there are some significant issues that get raised. I think it's interesting for countries who are at different stages of their post-colonial journey to come together. So, I think it's important that Pacific leaders sit with African leaders and Caribbean leaders and understand the different trajectories that their countries are on and what that might mean for their futures. So I think it definitely has benefit from that point of view. But I think in terms of actually shifting the dial in terms of international practice, I don't think it's got a lot going for it. But then we live in a time where multilateralism in general is on the wane. So generally important, actual concrete things arise out of bilateral or minilateral agreements, not out of big multilateral forums such as this one.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good point, and thank you for that. In terms of, and this wasn't the right forum for such a discussion anyway, but it's hard to ignore the elephant in the room. The Pacific continues to be in this weird position geopolitically and geopolitical tensions. Obviously, you've got United States and China vying for influence in the region. Wasn't much discussion on that, and you wouldn't expect it at CHOGM at all, of course. But do you think it's a missed opportunity, given it very much is obvious?
Well, I think for some small states, including those in the Pacific, it was probably quite nice to be in an environment where they didn't have either the US or China or both breathing down their necks and wanting to pull them into side meetings. And so I think, there was probably seen as a bit of a breathing space. I think it's important to realize that in terms of US proxies, there were some key ones in the room, particularly the UK, Australia, Canada. So they would have certainly been, they would have certainly been using that opportunity to press their, if not necessarily their concerns about China, but certainly their wanting to make use of that to press their support for these small states and how they can be of benefit to them, how they can be their trusted partners, whether it's in the economic sphere or the security sphere. So I've no doubt that it was there in an implied sense, even if not explicitly.
And final question, just before we wrap it up. I mean, how would you characterise, or how would you, I suppose, describe the current state of the Commonwealth as we look forward to the next CHOGM?
Look, I think, bearing in mind everything that I've said, I think, it benefits from a degree of longevity. So it's been around a while. So it's probably going to be hard to dismantle, even if that were the case. I think there will be an attempt to kind of refresh it and maybe give it different areas of focus or something a bit more concrete, given the new leadership, both in terms of the head of the Commonwealth, but more significantly at the Secretary General level. It'll be interesting to see whether its membership expands. So the two most recent members are African states who were not British colonies. So they've got no colonial legacy. They see membership of the Commonwealth as access to enhanced trade and economic opportunities. So we may see more of that, which would be interesting and possibly a little unexpected.
Certainly. Hey, a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for carving out a bit of your day to talk with us.